My father demanded I sign over my $5.8 million penthouse to my brother. When I refused, he slapped me in front of everyone. Then the lawyer, Mr. Callahan, stared straight at him and asked, "Sir, do you know who actually owns that $14 million mansion you live in?" Dad froze, his rage draining away. I was still rubbing the sting on my cheek when the lawyer, Mr. Callahan, closed the leather binder. The entire room, full of relatives and professional staff, went silent. 40 pairs of eyes held their breath, because nobody, absolutely nobody, had ever spoken to my father with that level of quiet authority. But at that moment, nothing mattered except that one question. I had arrived that morning from Virginia, stepping out of my Navy travel uniform, blazer, slacks, and low heels, which I hadn't bothered to change out of. The old brick building housing Harper and Dunn attorneys at law seemed too peaceful for the storm I suspected was coming. The receptionist had given me a sympathetic look, whispering a warning that they're already in the conference room. She knew the dynamic before I even opened the door. When I pushed the door open, I felt the old, familiar punch in the gut. My father, Charles Morgan, was sitting at the head of the table like he owned it, which he always seemed to believe he did. My older brother, Eric, sat beside him, wearing a smug grin and a brand new suit I knew he hadn't earned. Neither of them stood when I walked in. "Look who finally decided to show," Dad muttered, not even glancing my way. I ignored it. I had trained myself to ignore his small jabs years ago, a crucial skill for survival in the Morgan household. Mr. Callahan, a man whose tailored suit spoke of quiet wealth and competence, motioned for me to take a seat. "Thank you for coming, Lieutenant," he said warmly. "She ain't on duty now," my father scoffed, waving a hand. "No need to go dressing her up with titles." Callahan paused, just long enough to make his point, his expression unchanging. "It is a matter of respect, sir." I sat, keeping my face calm, a practiced mask I wore during deployments and now, apparently, for will readings. My heart, however, was already beating faster. The table was lined with thick folders, sealed envelopes, and a silver pen that looked older than me. Granddad, Walter Morgan, had always done everything with ceremony, even this final act. Callahan opened the binder and began. Per the instructions of the late Mr. Walter Morgan, we will begin with the division of primary assets. Dad lifted his hand, already impatient. "Let's skip ahead. Just get to the point. She can sign over her part to Eric afterward." My stomach tightened at his immediate assumption of control. "What part are we talking about, Dad?" I spoke softly. He didn't look at me, already confident in his command. Callahan cleared his throat, continuing with the list. "The penthouse on Brookside, valued at $5.8 million, is to go to." "That one," Dad interrupted, pointing at me without using my name. "That is the one she is signing over to her brother. It's not hers to keep. She doesn't even live here. Eric is the son who stayed, the one who will carry the family name." The room went completely still. This script had governed my entire life. Eric always got the best piece, and I was expected to hand over anything else. "I'm not signing anything," I said. My voice was low, controlled, and firm. Dad turned, finally, looking straight at me, his face already turning crimson. "It's not yours to keep. You don't need it." "He does, Dad, no." I exhaled hard, knowing I was crossing a line he had drawn long ago. The line that said, I must never challenge his authority. Before I could even move or finish the thought, he shot up from his chair. His hand came across my face, sharp, hot, and instantly humiliating. The sound echoed off the high walls of the conference room. A gasp rippled across the table. I did not cry. Years of naval discipline kept the tears locked away. But my cheek burned with the shock and the injustice. Something inside me, something old and tired, finally snapped free. I stood up slowly, ensuring my voice remained controlled and even. You should not have done that. Dad was breathing hard, his face a mask of rage and entitlement. But before he could launch into a fresh round of insults, Callahan spoke. His voice was steady, firm, and carried the weight of a seasoned legal professional who was completely done with the drama. Mr. Morgan, please sit down. My father glared, trying to reclaim dominance. You don't tell me. Callahan didn't raise his voice, didn't flinch, and didn't step back. He simply looked my father dead in the eye and delivered the single question that instantly turned the molecules of air to ice. Do you know who actually owns that $14 million mansion you live in? The heat was still spreading across my cheek. A physical reminder of my father's rage, as Mr. Callahan's quiet question settled over the mahogany conference table. It was the only sound now, except for the frantic, choked breathing of my father. The entire room was paralyzed. Father, who had been poised to launch another tirade, froze mid-shout. His jaw locked, and the color drained from his face, leaving the red mark of his prior anger looking sickly. Eric's smug smirk vanished entirely. He blinked slowly, like a machine sputtering to a halt. The question had hit like a physical shock wave, instantaneously stripping the father of his perceived authority. That house is mine. My father eventually choked out, though the conviction was gone from his voice. I've lived there 40 years. Everyone knows it is mine. He tried to recover the bluster, but the words were weak and hollow. Callahan didn't argue. He simply closed the large leather binder with a soft thud. His eyes were steady on my father's face. And yet, the lawyer said evenly, your father left very specific instructions. We aren't even halfway through the will. The father sank slowly back into his chair. The force that had propelled him up was gone, replaced by a devastating, visible fear. It was the fear of a king who suddenly realized the crown he was wearing was made of cheap tin. I watched him, and for the first time in my life, I saw a weakness he couldn't cover with noise. A murmur spread around the table, quiet, confused, and uneasy. The relatives who had been silent witnesses to the slap were now exchanging glances, some showing shock, others a vague guilt. They were realizing that the family story they had believed their entire lives might not be the truth at all. This was the core of my emotional shift. My hands were still shaking from the physical assault, but inside, a quiet strength I had forged through deployment storms and long nights at sea steadied itself. The physical shock of the slap instantly gave way to a cold, clear realization. This was not about Granddad's money. This was a complex, final act of justice he had orchestrated for me. Everyone was looking at me now, waiting. I met my father's eyes. I saw not the controlling parent, but the frightened man about to lose his mask. I felt no fear, only a cold clarity. Maybe, I said quietly. addressing the room but looking at the lawyer. "You should let him finish reading." The silence returned, heavier and more profound than before. Even the clicking of the grandfather clock seemed to stop. Callahan reopened the binder, turning past the pages we had read. As he did, I finally understood the scope of Granddad's planning. This wasn't just a simple division of assets. It was a complete and utter reckoning, designed to confront my father's toxic entitlement head-on. The fight was far from over, but the terrain had been irrevocably changed. When the initial reading concluded, a hushed, guilty silence followed. My family filed out of the conference room, none of them daring to make eye contact as they passed me. The slap, the mansion question, the sudden structural collapse of the family hierarchy, it had all turned into an invisible, yet potent, barrier between us. Dad walked out stiffly, his shoulders heavy, looking like a man who no longer trusted the floor beneath his feet. Eric followed, muttering about betrayal. As the door clicked shut, Mr. Callahan sat down, folded his glasses, and let out a long breath. He looked at me with an expression of professional detachment mixed with personal empathy. "You all right, Lieutenant?" he asked gently. My cheek was still warm where Dad's hand had landed, but I nodded. "I'm fine. I've been through worse, sir." He studied me for a moment, the way older mentors sometimes do, trying to discern if I was telling the truth or simply relying on the strength life had forced me to build. "Your grandfather, Walter," he said softly, "was a very private man, but he cared for you deeply." My throat tightened. I loved him. He was the only one who seemed to understand me. Callahan gave a small, acknowledging smile. He opened the leather binder again, flipping past the pages we had just read. "There is something more you need to hear before your father gets any ideas. He already has plenty." I sighed. Callahan tapped the page, his finger resting next to a legal paragraph. 13 years ago, long before he ever became ill, your grandfather transferred the deed to the mansion into your name. He placed it in a secured living trust with you as the sole beneficiary. I blinked. 13 years. I was barely out of high school then, about to leave for Navy boot camp. It didn't make sense. Why would he do that so early? Callahan leaned back. "Because he trusted you. You were the only one who visited him after your grandmother died. You wrote him letters from boot camp. You sent pictures from every deployment. You called on birthdays, holidays, and on days most people forget." I looked down, trying to process the revelation. Those calls and letters had never felt like a duty. They were just simple love for a man who had offered unconditional kindness. "Your father," Callahan continued, his voice neutral, "well, let's just say your grandfather had reservations about his financial conduct and temperament." That was the polite, attorney way of describing years of deep disappointment. I remembered the shouting, the slammed doors. The Christmas Eve Granddad skipped because Dad had insulted him over money. He saw the pattern before any of us did. Callahan slid a thick document toward me. "Your grandfather attached stringent protection clauses to the trust. Nobody, he made sure, can challenge ownership without facing significant legal consequences." "Including my father?" I asked quietly. "Especially your father," he confirmed. I swallowed hard, the magnitude of the planning hitting me. Granddad knew. He always knew how Dad treated me, how he dismissed my achievements, and how he valued control above all else. Callahan's silence was confirmation enough. Flipping through the paperwork, I saw signatures, notarized pages, and at the bottom of one page, a line in my grandfather's shaky, familiar handwriting. For her. She will know what to do. My eyes stung. It was a mission statement, not just a gift. There's more. Callahan added gently, handing me another folder. These are rental properties he owned. A duplex, 3 single-family homes, a storage business. He kept these investments quiet. Your father always assumed your grandfather was simply sitting on cash. The truth is, he invested safely. And he wanted those assets to go to the person who cared about the family name's honor, not its wallet. I sat back, letting the truth wash over me. I had spent years, desperately, trying to earn my father's approval through the Navy, through achievement, but it was Granddad who had seen and rewarded the person I already was. Why didn't he tell me any of this? I whispered. Because he wanted you to live freely. Callahan explained. He didn't want you weighed down by family politics or obligation. You built your own life, your own career, your own honor. He admired that. I bit my lip, my throat tightening. That moment felt like the ultimate validation. That's not all. Callahan said, opening a final section. Your grandfather also left you his personal stock accounts, approximately $1.7 million as of last quarter. I pressed a hand to my forehead. The room tilted slightly. The mansion. The penthouse, the properties, the stocks. It was an entire financial fortress built around me. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything right now. Just listen and understand, he advised. Your father expected everything to be his. He's been assuming it his entire adult life. That's why he acted the way he did today. And the slap? I murmured, touching my cheek. Callahan's expression tightened. He lost control. Your grandfather anticipated conflict, which is why everything was placed out of reach, legally secured. He made sure you wouldn't be bullied into handing it over. That truth hit me harder than the money. He made sure I wouldn't be bullied. You've lived under that toxicity for a long time, haven't you? Callahan asked, meeting my gaze. Since the day I was born, I admitted, slowly nodding. He closed the binder and placed his hand on top of it. You're not alone now. And you don't have to give in. Not anymore. A peaceful silence settled between us, the first calm moment of the day. Finally, I asked the question that burned inside me. What happens when my father finds out that everything I own includes the house he is living in? Callahan gave a weary, knowing smile. Then he'll have to face the truth he's been avoiding for 40 years. And you, Lieutenant Morgan, he paused. We'll have to decide what to do with that truth. I leaned back, letting the weight of the trust settle on my shoulders. Granddad had trusted me with all of it. Why me? Because you earned it, Callahan whispered. The ultimate inheritance was not the money, but the validation of my own strength and honor. Now, I had to figure out how to navigate the storm he had prepared me for. Leaving Mr. Callahan's office, the autumn air felt cold. Carrying the weight of the enormous trust my grandfather had placed in me. I unlocked my rental car and sat behind the wheel, staring blankly ahead. My phone immediately began buzzing, first once, then twice. Then a relentless stream of notifications. Texts and missed calls flooded in. Dad, demanding a conversation. Eric, insisting I answer. Aunt Mary, advising against making any decisions until Dad calms down. I could hear the approaching tidal wave of manipulation and rage. I wasn't ready for their anger, and I certainly wasn't ready for the inevitable guilt tripping. I pulled into a grocery store parking lot just long enough to turn the phone completely off. I needed to act on the clarity Callahan had given me, not react to my family's chaos. Instead of driving back to the hotel, I put the car in drive and headed toward the mansion. The $14 million piece of real estate my father believed was his birthright, and which now legally belonged to me. The drive was quiet. The mansion's lawn was trimmed near the front, but the perfection felt skin deep. Another small reminder of my father's loud, proud facade that barely covered irresponsibility. I parked near the front steps and sat for a moment, staring at the double doors. Walking up to them now, with the truth sealed in a folder under my arm, felt completely surreal. When I pushed the door open, it creaked the same way it always had. But the air inside was different. Less like home, more like expensive, stale cologne layered over an underlying mustiness. The foyer was familiar, slick marble floors, and a massive chandelier that seemed too large for the space. The family portraits confirmed my memory, all featuring Eric prominently in the center, and me somewhere off to the side. I walked farther inside, and the sense of deep neglect grew stronger. The expensive wallpaper near the stairs was peeling slightly. A few light bulbs had burned out and never been replaced. Under Granddad's meticulous care, this house had been immaculate. Under Dad, it was merely an impressive stage set. I reached the den and stopped abruptly. Boxes. Dozens of them, stacked haphazardly. Some were labeled. Some were open, revealing stacks of messy paperwork and letters tied with twine, marked with red stickers from the bank. On the coffee table sat a thick folder, labeled in bold text, "Second Notice, Final Warning." I opened it, and my stomach immediately clenched. Property taxes were 3 years behind, with penalties stacked high like bricks. Dad had always bragged that the house was worth more than most people made in 10 lifetimes. But he had forgotten that owning a mansion is vastly different from affording one. I flipped through another stack and felt my stomach drop even lower. Loan documents. Lines of credit Dad had taken out against the house multiple times. Some were clearly to support Eric's failed business ventures. Others were simply marked consolidation. Many of the signatures looked suspiciously rushed. The interest rates were predatory. And what made my jaw clench was the owner line. Dad had repeatedly written his name on the line marked owner, even though he hadn't been the legal owner for 13 years. He had taken out loans, potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars worth, against a property he did not legally possess. If the bank dug deeper, if anyone decided to investigate, this could ruin him entirely. I sank onto the sofa, stunned into silence. Granddad hadn't just been wise, he had been strategically defensive. He knew Dad was financially reckless, impulsive, and willing to cross lines he shouldn't. He had known the mansion needed protection, and more importantly, he had known I've needed protection from inheriting a financial disaster. All the anger my father had thrown at me over the years, my Navy career, my independence, my uniform, had been a covering up of his deepest, most profound fear, losing control of his image, his authority, and the house that symbolized his false success. And now the truth was catching up. The emotional shift was complete, the clarity of his hypocrisy solidified my resolve. A loud thud pulled me from my thoughts. "Hello," I called out, but there was no answer. I followed the sound to Dad's home office. Once Granddad's study. The thud was a stack of papers that had slid off the desk. On his laptop sat an open document and a handwritten note. Property transfer agreement, Eric Morgan. He had already drafted paperwork to illegally transfer the mansion to Eric, planning to give away something he didn't even own. A mix of emotions hit me: anger, disbelief, and a strange, profound grief for a father who had consistently chosen pride and deceit over relationship. I took a deep, stabilizing breath and closed the laptop. This wasn't just fallout. This was a storm he had built, lie by lie, brick by brick, and it was now crashing down. I heard tires crunching outside. I looked out the window. Dad's truck. He slammed the door shut and marched toward the house, his face red, his shoulders stiff. He knew. He knew I had seen the files. He knew the truth was finally out. I squared my shoulders. I was done running. I was ready to use the legal truth in my possession. Not for revenge, but for the firm establishment of boundaries. I stood by the window as the front door swung open. The air rushing out of the room. Dad stepped inside, his eyes locking onto mine across the foyer. His face was a thundercloud, his shoulders still stiff from his angry march up the driveway. "What did Callahan tell you?" he demanded, his voice thick with strained authority. "Everything," I replied. The single word hung in the air, weighted with the years of silence and deceit it contained. His jaw twitched, the muscle clenching beneath his skin. "Then you know you owe your family." "I don't owe you anything," I said quietly. It was the calmest sentence I had ever spoken to him, and the truest. He stared at me, stunned. For the first time in my life, I watched my father struggle for words. Real words, not insults. Not anger, just a desperate search for his old vocabulary of command, which was failing him. He found none, because he knew the truth. He wasn't the victim here. He wasn't the head of the family. And for the first time in 40 years, he wasn't in control. I finally broke the silence. "Dad," I said, "we need to talk." His face twisted in disgust. "We already did talk. You refused to do the right thing." "The right thing?" A bitter laugh slipped out. "You mean signing over my penthouse or pretending this?" I gestured around the vast, neglected living room. "Still belongs to you." He looked away, his jaw tensed. "You think you earned all this? You think you did something special to deserve it?" "No," I said, meeting his challenge. "I didn't earn it. Granddad gifted it, and he had reasons. And his reason was wrong." Dad snapped, his voice rising. He was dying. He wasn't in his right mind, and you. He jabbed a finger toward my chest. "You should have known better than to take advantage of him. That's not what happened, and you know it." I retorted, stunned by his immediate gaslighting. Before he could roar again, Eric barged in through the front door, stomping into the foyer like a man arriving to collect a long-promised prize. "So," he announced loudly, "are we doing this or not? Dad said you'd come to your senses after cooling off." Dad's silence answered for him. Eric crossed his arms. "Look, just sign the papers. You're Navy, so you're barely home. It makes sense for me to have the house. The house that doesn't belong to either of you." I countered slowly. Eric rolled his eyes dramatically. Don't get technical. Dad's lived here forever. Everybody knows it's his. Ownership doesn't work on vibes, I said. There are legal documents. Dad waved a dismissive hand. Documents can be fixed. That single sentence sent an actual chill down my spine, suggesting his recklessness went deeper than mere negligence. What does that mean? I asked. Dad hesitated, then looked away. Right then, I understood. My father had spent decades assuming he was untouchable, insulated by his wealth and status. This was the moment the world stopped believing in his facade. Eric stepped closer, puffing his chest out. Just sign the penthouse over to me, and we'll work out the mansion later. Work out? I repeated. You mean steal? Eric's eyes widened. I deserve something. I've had it rough. What have you ever worked for? I asked softly, the clarity cutting through my exhaustion. You've had every advantage. Dad paid your rent for 10 years. He bailed you out of debt. He covered your failed businesses. And you still want more. I need stability. He snapped. The word was so painfully ironic I almost laughed. I had found stability on Navy ships, in the middle of the Atlantic. It wasn't something handed to me, but something I built through sacrifice. Dad stepped between us, trying one last time to exert his dominance. Enough. You're going to sign. You think wearing that uniform makes you someone important. You think it makes you smarter than me. I met his eyes without flinching. No, I said calmly. Being in the Navy taught me I don't have to fear you. That truth stunned him. For the first time, my father had no immediate, angry reply. He looked lost. When he finally found the only weapon he had left, it was shame. You owe this family, he hissed. You owe me. I shook my head. No, I don't owe you anything. His mouth opened and closed, gasping for air. Like a king realizing his crown was never real. I broke the stalemate by pointing toward the boxes of unpaid bills. These, all of this, I said. You took out loans on a house you didn't own. You're drowning in debt, Dad. That's none of your concern. It is my concern, I said firmly, stepping forward. Because this house is mine, and everything you've done affects the property I now legally have to protect. Eric scoffed. Protect? You going to throw us out? I inhaled slowly, choosing my words carefully. No, I'm not throwing anyone out. I'm not my father. Dad flinched visibly. But things will change. I continued quietly. Meaning what? He asked, his voice low and tight. Meaning, I said, meeting his gaze. You will not make any more financial decisions involving this house. You won't take out loans. You won't use it as collateral. This ends now. Eric threw his hands up, shouting about insanity. Dad, defeated, dropped into a leather chair, the same one Granddad used to sit in, and looked suddenly smaller. What are you going to do? He asked, his voice weak. I'll give you options, not orders, I said. You can stay here. As long as you are willing to pay rent and stop incurring debt against the property. Or you can move somewhere more affordable. I'll help you relocate. Rent, Eric spluttered. And you, Eric, I said plainly, cutting him off, need to get a job. He went pale. A job. I have responsibilities. No, I said firmly. You have excuses. Dad looked between his furious, flailing son and his calm, steady daughter. In that moment, I saw him realize the painful truth. I had grown up, and they had not. He rose slowly from the chair. You're really doing this, he whispered, drawing a line. Yes, I said. Because someone has to. He looked at me with a complicated mixture of anger, pride, and fear. He turned away. For once, he didn't shout or demand. He simply walked out of the room, shoulders heavy. Eric followed, muttering about betrayal. I felt a confusing mix of relief and grief. The line was drawn, and I was not stepping back. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise, an old Navy habit. My body was used to waking before the world did, ready for duty. The hotel room was quiet, and the faint tenderness on my cheek from Dad's slap had softened into a dull ache, a bruise I carried deeper than the skin. My phone buzzed. It was Mom. I let it ring twice before answering, bracing myself. Honey. Her voice trembled immediately. Are you all right? I'm okay, Mom, I said softly. I heard what happened, she whispered. The slap, the yelling, and everything else that followed. Your father didn't sleep last night. He sat in the den with the lights off, just staring at the floor. I think he's scared. I swallowed hard. Fear didn't excuse the harm he caused, but it explained the desperate rage I had witnessed. I'll come by later, Mom, I said. Thank you. By late afternoon, I found myself back at Callahan's office for a scheduled meeting. This time, it wasn't for revelations, but for decisions. Callahan greeted me with 2 mugs of coffee. One black, one with 2 creams. Still how you take it. Still, I replied. We sat across from each other at the same mahogany table, where everything had unraveled the day before. Callahan opened a thick file. I spent last night reviewing the trust, and more importantly, your father's outstanding loans. My stomach nodded. How bad is it? He exhaled slowly. Bad. He slid several documents toward me: loan statements, bank warnings, and interest schedules. Your father is in significant debt, over $800,000 across multiple lines of credit. I rubbed my forehead. How could he let it get this far? Living beyond his means. Callahan replied gently. Trying to fund your brother's ventures, always gambling that the next investment would pay off the last one. He was underwater for years. And Granddad? I murmured. Did he know? Yes, Callahan said, his expression softening. Your grandfather covered his debt several times, until he realized your father wasn't learning. He stopped because he wanted to protect you from inheriting a financial disaster. I leaned back, letting the truth settle. Granddad hadn't just been generous, he had been a strategic, defensive protector. And now? I asked. Legally. Legally. He confirmed. You are not responsible for any of your father's debt. You have no obligation to pay a single dollar. A wave of immense relief washed over me. But Callahan continued. However, if the bank discovers that your father took out those loans against a property he didn't legally own, there could be severe complications, investigations, penalties. My chest tightened. Could he face charges? Yes, Callahan said. Potentially. I swallowed hard. That wasn't what I wanted. No matter what Dad had done, I didn't want to watch him lose everything and possibly go to jail. That wasn't revenge, that was destruction. I wasn't that person. What can I do? I asked quietly. Callahan folded his hands. You can choose not to press anything. And you can choose not to notify the bank yourself. I won't notify them, I said immediately. He nodded. Then the odds of legal fallout reduced significantly. The house is safe and secure under your grandfather's trust. And my father, I whispered. Callahan gave me a long, steady look. The consequences he faces now will come from truth, not from you. When I left Callahan's office, I drove straight to the town cemetery. The sun was lowering, casting long, gold shadows over the grass. I found the headstone for Walter Morgan, beloved grandfather. I knelt down, the cool grass brushing my knees. "Hi, Granddad," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "I hope you know I'm trying to do this right." "I don't want to break Dad," I said softly, tears welling. "I just don't want to be stepped on anymore. I don't want to be the forgotten kid." My voice wavered. "You believed in me when nobody else did. You saw something worth loving. And now I have to do right by what you left. Not just the money, but the lessons, the honor." I stayed there until the sun dipped behind the trees, until the air cooled. I wasn't trying to win, I realized. I was trying not to lose myself. When I stood, I placed my hand on the cool stone. "Thank you," I whispered. The grief had been replaced by a quiet, protective resolve. I was ready to face him again, not with anger, but with the strength he had given me. Mom was waiting on the porch when I pulled up to the mansion that evening. She wrapped her arms around me the moment I reached the steps. "You look tired, honey," she murmured. "I am," I admitted. The grief and the decision to spare my father the worst legal consequences had drained me. Inside, the house was unnaturally quiet. Dad wasn't in the den or his office. He was sitting alone at the dining room table in the dark, hands folded, staring at nothing. Mom placed a hand on my shoulder. "He's been like that all day. He hasn't moved." I stepped closer to the table. "Dead." He lifted his eyes slowly. They were red, not from anger this time, but from some deep, unseen exertion. "Your grandfather trusted you more than he trusted me," he said, his voice flat. "That's not what this is about," I replied, pulling out a chair across from him and sitting down. He shook his head. "No, it is." A long, heavy silence settled between us. Then, he whispered words I never thought I would hear him say. "I don't know who I am without this house." My chest tightened. He finally looked at me, really looked at me, without the lens of expectation or disdain. "And I don't know who I am," he whispered, "if I'm not stronger than you." I swallowed hard. "Dad, this has never been a competition." He covered his face with both hands, his shoulders trembling just slightly. For the first time in my life, my father looked completely broken. And for the first time in my life, I felt strong enough not to need him to be weak, but strong enough to potentially help him. He lowered his hands slowly, his fingers trembling. He looked older, like the armor he'd worn his whole life had finally cracked open. We sat in a silence that felt soft and necessary, not out of fear, but because the moment required gentleness. "I messed up," he murmured, his voice thick. "Your grandfather trusted you. And instead of seeing that, I treated you like someone trying to take something from me." I folded my hands, waiting for him to continue, sensing this was the first time he had ever truly confessed a flaw. "I've always been proud of your brother." He took a shaky breath. He was easy to understand. He needed me. He listened to me. He never challenged me. His eyes flickered toward mine, then down again. "You were different. You didn't need me." "Different isn't bad," I said gently. "It scared me," he admitted. "That you didn't need me. That you had your own mind, your own strength. You were always bigger than me somehow." No, Dad. I wasn't bigger. I was just trying to live. Eric needed me every day. He insisted, his voice dropping. You didn't. I didn't know how to love a child who didn't need me. The sentence was devastating in its honesty. I exhaled softly. Dad, needing someone isn't the only way to love them. You could have just been proud. He swallowed hard. I didn't know how. It was raw, imperfect, and painful, but it was honest. After all these years, honesty felt like the first real inheritance he had ever offered me. He sat straighter, embarrassment coloring his features. About the slap yesterday. You lost control. I interrupted gently, keeping him from spiraling into excuses. But it wasn't the first time. His shoulders slumped. I know. I pulled out the folder from Callahan's office and set it on the table. I don't want to destroy you, Dad, I said softly. I'm not here to take revenge. I'm here to set things right and to protect what Granddad built. He looked at the folder warily. The house stays in my name, I stated. But you can stay here peacefully if you're willing to make changes. Real ones. What changes? He asked, confused. No more loans, I said. No more reckless finances. No more decisions behind people's backs. And Eric needs to stand on his own 2 feet, not yours. Dad let out a long, slow breath. He won't like that. That's okay, I replied. He doesn't have to like it. He just has to grow up. He closed his eyes briefly, then nodded, a small but real acceptance of the terms. I'll try, he said. I don't know if I can fix everything, but I'll try. That's all I need, I said. For the first time since I was a child. Dad reached across the table, placed his hand over mine, and whispered, I'm sorry. The apology was true, and it was enough. We spent the rest of the evening cleaning out the den together, throwing away expired bills, and sorting through paperwork. Mom joined us halfway through, quiet tears in her eyes when she saw us talking. She hugged me so tightly I could feel her heartbeat. Your grandfather would be proud, she whispered. Later, Eric showed up, shoulders slumped. I heard you talk to Dad, he muttered. So, what now? You kicking us out? No, I said gently. But things are going to change. He bristled, ready to argue, but then he looked at Dad, who was standing behind me, quieter than he had ever been. Something shifted in Eric. I guess, he muttered, the words almost foreign to him. I could find a real job. It was a small beginning, but beginnings matter. I felt grief, relief, and the start of something like peace. A few weeks passed after the confrontation, and the raw, imperfect apology. The leaves outside the mansion windows changed color, and life settled into something that, while still fragile, resembled peace. Dad started attending financial counseling sessions, a commitment he had never managed before. Eric, surprisingly, got a job at a local auto shop, a concrete step toward standing on his own feet. Mom and I talked more in those weeks than we had in a decade, forging a new connection built on shared truth. And me, I felt lighter. Not richer, though legally I was. Not triumphant, though justice had been served. Just lighter, as if a weight I had carried since childhood. The weight of constantly trying to prove my worth had finally been set down. When Thanksgiving approached, I made a decision. A nervous and careful one. I would host dinner at the mansion. I didn't want to show off the house or the inheritance. I wanted to demonstrate that the family story didn't have to end in courtrooms or conference rooms. if we chose differently. The atmosphere that day was tense, but subdued. One by one, relatives filed into the house. My aunt, who had clutched her pearls during the slap, hugged me tightly and murmured an apology for judging without knowing the full truth. My cousins offered tentative hellos. The dining room, usually a site of silent, familial politics, felt different. Dad carved the turkey with steady hands, hands that shook noticeably less now. He was quieter, more thoughtful, and offered small, genuine compliments to Mom on the side dishes. Eric made awkward small talk, but he tried, and effort was what counted now. In the middle of it all, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt home. Not because of the house or the title of owner, but home in the sense of belonging, of being seen, and of being valued for who I was, not for what I could be coerced into offering. Near the end of the night, Dad tapped his glass lightly with a fork, requesting attention. "I just want to say," he began, his voice surprisingly steady, "I'm grateful for my daughter." The room grew quiet, and he looked directly at me. "She's stronger than I ever gave her credit for, and kinder than I deserved." My eyes stung. I stood and hugged him gently, carefully, recognizing it as a fragile truce, a new foundation. He hugged me back, and for the first time in 40 years, the embrace didn't feel like a demand or a criticism. It felt like recognition. As the last guests left that night, I walked onto the balcony overlooking the lawn. The cold air brushed my face. I thought of Granddad, of his quiet wisdom, his defensive protection, and his faith in me. He had given me more than money. He had given me clarity, the ability to draw boundaries, and the chance to heal something deeply broken. Maybe that was the real inheritance. Not the $14 million, but the opportunity to stop fighting and start building. I realized I wasn't trying to win a battle against my father anymore. I was simply living the honorable life my grandfather always knew I could. If you have ever carried a heavy family story of your own, I hope this one reminds you that healing is possible, that truth matters, that boundaries matter, and that it's never too late to choose a better ending. We heal together, one story at a time.